Hi, everybody. Joseph here with Bean to Bar World. Welcome to another episode of Chocolate Travels, and I'm here with Luke Owen Smith. So, Luke, tell us a bit about yourself and how you're connected to chocolate.
Hey Joseph, nice to see you again. And yeah, thanks for asking me to do this. So I have been involved with craft chocolate for, I guess, officially about 8 years. And I for 7 of those years, ran a company that I started called The Chocolate Bar. We were an online chocolate retailer, and I did lots of events and talks and all kinds of things to kind of help spread the word about great chocolate in New Zealand. And yeah, I sold that business a year ago, and these days I'm still involved with chocolate in various ways. I do a lot of journalism about craft chocolate, and I judge at various awards. And yeah, generally other bits and bobs, bits of marketing and photography and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay,
So.
great. And for those who obviously don't know, I met Luke when I was living in New Zealand years ago for a brief time. And I remember you at the chocolate festival at the time. There was a chocolate festival. And
Mm.
I thought what I liked about you is I overheard you doing an interview with someone else, and you were talking about a chocolate company in Europe, and you were saying as how you didn't, even though it's very popular, very award-winning, you're like, to be honest, I don't think their chocolate's that great. And I like that. I like that that you're not afraid to, you know, draw your own conclusions about fine chocolate, not just go along with any trends or anything like that. I really like that. So that's why I'm excited to do this interview and get some feedback on what you think about craft chocolate. So my first question is, what drew you to fine chocolate? How did it all begin? And do you remember your first fine craft chocolate bar?
Yeah. So it was when I came to Wellington, which is I've been here 11 years, and I was working in the craft beer scene at that point. I'd worked with beer from the age of about
Sorry, where
17.
did you come from to Wellington?
So originally I'm from North Yorkshire in England,
Oh, okay.
and then I was in Australia for a couple of years, and then I came to New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I was working in the craft beer world, but I'd always had an interest in all food and drink, really, and I'd worked in various areas. And yeah, I was really into chocolate, but just kind of normal chocolate. And then it was through Wellington Chocolate Factory that
Oh,
I
okay.
learned about the bean to bar movement, and that there was such a thing as craft chocolate. And
Mm,
this was kind of before the factory opened.
okay.
But I
Was that when
had a
Rochelle was selling them in the markets, in the farmers markets, or?
Yeah, it would have been, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I had a connection with Gabe, and so I kind of learned about what they were
Okay.
doing. And yeah, I went down to the factory possibly on the open day or very early, and had a taste of their Peru 70%, which
Oh,
was
nice.
yeah, my first experience of a bean to bar craft chocolate, and it was
Okay.
just a complete like light bulb moment, like
Yeah. That one
my
is
first.
very unique. It has those fruity notes, the
Yeah,
brightness, so
it's a
different.
great first one to taste, because it's just like, wow, okay, so chocolate doesn't just taste like chocolate, and just yeah. And I at that point had experienced the boom in craft beer and really enjoyed being part of that and just the buzz, and I kind of just felt, well, I'm really into chocolate and I feel like doing something new. I've been working in bars for years, and yeah, I just decided to make chocolate my profession. And
Very nice. It's
not long,
interesting. Sorry,
sorry,
finish.
just not long after that, I yeah had the idea to start the chocolate bar, and I started it very, very quickly, like within a month of the initial
Oh,
idea.
really? Oh, wow.
I would not recommend to anyone, but I was just like, I
You're
was
just so
so
excited.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. So
Wow.
no,
That's
it's
pretty
great.
cool. Wow, you really jumped into it. No, it's
Yeah,
interesting because I'm not a huge beer drinker, to be honest. And it was in Wellington because the craft beer thing is so big there. That
yeah.
actually, I was like, starting to get into it in Wellington. That was the first time I actually got into some beers, and I did a tasting at a local brewery with some of the Wellington Chocolate Factory chocolate, and I was like,
Yeah.
huh, this actually goes really well. I think, there's many things you can pair chocolate with, and to be honest, I think beer and chocolate go better than wine and chocolate, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I love pairing beer and chocolate. I do it all the time. And
Yeah,
I mean, there's just so many more different styles of beers than there are styles of wines. It's such a vast area. So there's always a beer to go with a chocolate. Like you can always find something.
that's
Like,
really cool.
mm,
Hopefully, you'll start in the future one day. I'd like to see a beer with chocolate thing that you develop. That'd be really cool.
yeah, yeah, for
Some sort of
sure.
concept. So we talked a little bit about what motivated your business that you started, and that was just your eyes were open when you tasted that Wellington Chocolate Factory Peruvian bar,
Mm,
and sort of similar to me years ago when I was getting into fine chocolate. It was sort of this wow moment when I tried it for the first time, and I was like, huh. I didn't know chocolate can taste like this. That kind of got me excited. So it seems like similar to you as well. Now, one thing I want to talk about is before we keep talking about this, what the terms. So, there's a lot of terms that are in our industry that are used interchangeably: fine, craft, bean to bar, artisan, things like that. And I remember
yeah.
you pointed out that you like to use the word craft chocolate to describe
Mm,
sort of what we do. I tend to use the word fine chocolate. So, why do you
yeah.
prefer that word, and how do you define it?
Yeah. So I switch a little bit between bean to bar and craft, and sometimes I use them together,
Mhm.
which is not super catchy, but it's kind of more of an accurate representation. But yeah, I'd probably say craft more than anything. I think because craft beer is so big here, it's just a
Mm,
really good way. Like people just kind of get what you mean when you go
that
craft
makes
chocolate, and they're like,
sense.
oh, so there's like a chocolate equivalent of craft beer, and it's like instantly they get quite a lot that you're talking about, smaller scale, higher quality, like so it's yeah, I just find it's an easy way to quickly get people to know what you mean.
That's a really
Yeah.
good point. Yeah, I like that because it is very challenging for a lot of makers and anyone involved to differentiate what makes it so special. And so,
Mm.
because craft resonates in New Zealand, I guess because of the beer, that makes perfect sense. Do you
Yeah.
feel like it's a bit confusing in the chocolate world with these different terms? Do you think they can be used interchangeably? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it can be confusing. And obviously this gets talked about a lot. I think a lot of it is just to do with the fact that chocolate is a pretty young culture in terms of eating chocolate, like bars of chocolate. When you compare it to beer or wine or bread or cheese, it's a very young thing. So I think people get a bit hung up about defining these terms. And for me, I think it's just the situation we're in because it's so young, and I think it will work itself out over time. Like I part of which we'll talk about more later, but part of why I like to do journalism is I think the media has a lot to do with defining these terms. And even like, I'm interested in Google. I'm interested in what does Google say when I put in
Mhm.
craft chocolate,
Right. Yeah.
and what it says now to what it says when I started is something very different in New
Hmm.
Zealand. I search craft chocolate now, and I pretty much get all genuine craft chocolate makers or articles
Mhm.
of craft chocolate probably that I've written. It's like, I'm really interested in helping to define that, but it does take time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is that, it's people are trying to come to terms with what it is, how to differentiate it. And then
Mm.
the whole term bean to bar too. I mean, Nestle is a bean to bar maker, Lindt is a bean to bar maker.
Yeah.
You define
Yeah.
it literally. So there's how do you separate chocolatier from this bean to bar maker, and then how do you separate this fine chocolate maker like Wellington from Whitaker's or whoever else is out there,
Yeah.
right? So it'll take some time to mold it out. So good. No, I like that. That's interesting. Um, Now, do you consider yourself a chocolate sommelier? Is that how you represent yourself? Is that
I don't refer to myself as that. I guess I could be called that.
I would say
Yeah, I guess.
so.
Yeah, yeah. I probably identify most as a journalist these
Okay.
days. But like, yeah, I do all sorts of other things in the industry, and
So
I guess that
you wear that cap sometimes, you would
yeah,
say?
and also the cap of just like helping to grow the community in New
Mm,
Zealand. I'm kind of like a bit of like the glue between a lot of the people who are involved, who are mostly makers, whereas I'm in this kind of unique position.
right.
But yeah, certainly a lot of the work I've done, you could call chocolate sommelier work.
Yeah, I think so. And you're very confident, you're very seasoned, you have a lot of experience under your belt, which there's a lot of people now who come out with, they take a 1, 2 week course, they're chocolate sommelier, which is wonderful, but they have a long way to go to really grasp a lot of it. And so
Mm.
I think, for you, definitely you wear that cap many times and you have. So what would you think would be for yourself or for others, for me, whoever, what do you think would be the duty of a chocolate sommelier? What do you think we should be doing in the chocolate world?
I mean, predominantly, I would say inspiring passion for great chocolate. I think I
Inspiring
just see
who? Consumers?
consumers, but also people in the industry. I think a lot of my work has, I know that I've had small part to play in inspiring other chocolate businesses to go in a certain direction.
That's
So
good.
it's not just consumers, it's professionals, but yeah, just sharing the passion, I would say, educating, yeah, just spreading the word and growing the culture. Yeah.
So on that point, because you mentioned that work hand in hand with some local makers, probably they're very new. Everyone is relatively new.
Yeah.
So why do you think they would consider because they're the maker, they're the ones making the chocolate. Why do
Mm.
they go to you and why do they appreciate your opinions and your input?
Um, well,
It's a
yeah,
question.
I ask myself the same question. So I'm English and I don't find it easy to compliment myself. But I guess one thing is I've tasted a ridiculous amount of chocolate from all around the world,
Mm,
like compared to most people over the years of running the business and before and after. Yeah, like, and so much of building up experience, I think, is just tasting, 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 and just learning more and more. And then, I'm very connected with the international community. I talk with people
mhm.
all the time. I've read various books, I've
Yeah,
just dedicated myself to it for so long. So,
that's wonderful.
yeah, but I mean, for me, it's always interesting when makers either come to me for advice or say that like I've helped them or inspired them, and I'm just like, whoa, but I'm your fanboy here. Like
I've had
it's
some
so
people say that to me too, and I'm
yeah,
like, I don't think I did that much. Like,
yeah, totally.
but that's wonderful. No, it's good, and I know you have had a big hand in the New Zealand chocolate scene, so that's
Mm.
really nice and good. So the next question is, um, we can go on forever on this question, but if there's someone out there who's a beginner in craft chocolate, what criteria do you use? What's like the 1, 2, 3, 4 things you go through to determine this chocolate? Maybe you walked into a shop, you never heard of this brand, you pick it up. What are you looking
Mm.
for? How do you determine quality?
Yeah, it is an endless question. I mean, first and foremost, flavor and texture above anything else, of
Okay, but
course.
let's say you want to purchase it. There's a few, even before
Okay, so
tasting it.
before
What do
tasting,
you look
yeah.
for?
Yeah, I guess just great design.
Okay.
And it's about, you know, how much am I learning about this company or this person who's making the chocolate from their packaging? There should be a story to tell and there should be some sort of depth to the information I'm receiving, I would say. Yeah, I mean, you pick it up over time from seeing hundreds and thousands of chocolate wrappers, but yeah, I know what to look for. You still get surprises, of course, but over time, I think you get better and better at
So you want to see a story, you want to see information about the makers or something. So what kind of information? What resonates with you?
I guess it can be a variety of things. I
Mm,
mean, I love it if they give a decent amount of information about the origin, like where it's coming from, exact locations, how. But I mean, this is for me, like this probably isn't the same for newcomers, like for me, because I know a lot, like if I can see like, what's what's the fermentation profile, or like how were these beans dried, or stuff like that. Like I love that. It's super geeky.
Right.
But then also, yeah, I want to know the story of the maker. I want to know maybe like, I mean, there's various ways you can design your brand, I guess, but
So I guess my question more though is, let's say there's someone, they've been to your tasting, my tasting, like I like craft chocolate, I like fine chocolate. When I go out now, I want to look for it. So what things should they look for on a chocolate bar before they actually buy it, before they actually taste it?
well, ingredients list is
Okay.
is a big one. It's yeah, it's nothing's black and white in this, but usually a good craft bar will have very minimal ingredients, unless it's like a crazy flavored bar with all kinds
Right.
of stuff. But like it's a lot more likely to see a lot more additives on a cheap industrial bar.
Okay.
Yeah, and openness about the origin, if it's
Why is that important? Openness of the origin.
well, I guess it's just, well, it's a complex answer. You learn origins that are good over time,
Mm,
but speaking more generally, like it's rare for a big industrial bar to be very specific about the origin of the beans. They might give you the country. It's unlikely that you'll get like much more specific than that. Yeah.
yes. So that's an important point because you are starting to see the bigger manufacturers starting to replicate the fine chocolate lingo and terms of the single origins, and it starts to get confusing for consumers. So I think I like that point of being even more specific, which co-op, because they're probably not going to tell you
Yeah.
exactly those specific locations.
Mm.
So that's a good point. Good. And then when they open it up and when they taste it, what are they looking for?
So yeah, actually just I wrote something about this that I posted yesterday. It's the difference in quality in flavor is inherently quite difficult to describe. It's a much more nuanced and complex experience, I would say.
Yeah.
The flavors of cheap chocolate usually are fairly monotone, fairly straightforward, disappear quite quickly, often. Whereas with a good craft bar, I would be looking for what I call like a good flavor journey. It's developing over time as it melts. It lingers for a long time. There's all kinds of different elements, and you feel like you need to go back because it's like, whoa, there was so much going on there. I need to try it again. It's just a more complex and I guess a more harmonious experience as well. I think this is something that even new craft makers sometimes don't quite get right. It's a common problem I find with newcomers is that, okay, there's some nice flavors in here, but they're kind of disconnected. Like the great bars, it's like everything is in harmony, yeah, and balanced. Yeah.
That's a good point too, right? Exactly. So there's, a lot of makers could be using the same fine cacao beans, exact same batches and origins and whatnot, but some of them, roast and refine it in a way where the flavors make sense, and some of them might be just a bit too all over the place. It's like, why is this earthy mushroom tone paired with this cherry thing? And just doesn't
Yeah.
work sometimes. So I can see what you're saying there, definitely. And that multi-layeredness. I compare it
Mm,
a lot to music. It's like sort of like a monotone couple notes on a keyboard versus
mm,
playing a beautiful range of all these notes, right? Same idea, definitely.
yeah.
Good, good. Um, so what helpful tips would you give others who sort of want to start their own career in craft chocolate, tasting, curating, education? Any couple tips that you would give to someone who's like, I like this stuff, I'm passionate about it. How do I start developing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, don't expect to get a full-time job out of it too quickly.
No,
It's it's niche right
the
now,
labor of love, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think just spread your passion, keep an open mind and keep learning, I would say. I
Keep
think,
learning. Yeah.
yeah, I think when I first started doing talks and tastings professionally, I was very, very geeky, and like I quickly realized that the audience was mostly not going to really get it to the level I was getting it, and so you have to learn ways to like introduce people slowly and kind of build it up. But that just happens over time, the more tastings you do and stuff.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah,
It's kind of the point of we sort of loosen up over time. I was like that too. It's like, why wouldn't you want to sit in a 2 hour lecture about chocolate aroma?
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
why wouldn't you? That's the best thing. And most people are like, no, I don't think I want to do
Yeah, I learned very quickly, like, give people a piece of chocolate as soon as they walk in the door. Like,
that.
don't talk for half an hour
I
before they
know.
get chocolate. Yeah.
Good.
And I
Excellent.
think also like it's really important to make people feel comfortable with sharing what they think,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
it's just so common for people to feel like, oh, I'm not a connoisseur, I don't understand this, I'm not going to say what I think. And it's like there's no wrong answer, and people need to know that. It's like it's just about what are you experiencing? Let's talk about it.
Exactly. Exactly. As a beginner, you're not a chocolate judge. You're not, analyzing the bars. You're just enjoying them, right? It's like going to a museum. You don't know anything about this artist on the wall, but you can have an experience with it, right? And so that's a really great point. I like that because, you want people to not worry about getting the right answer and just what are you tasting? Do you like it or not? Where is it taking you? Yeah,
Yeah, it
that's
should
a really
always
good
be
point.
fun. It should always be fun, basically.
Um, So this might have we might have covered this earlier, but do you ever offer your critiques to chocolate makers? And if so, are they usually well received? Do you have any memorable moments, good or bad, where offering, or do you feel like maybe it's not my place? If they ask me, maybe I will. And if they do ask you, are you pretty honest, or do you have to be very nice about it?
Yeah, no, I've given feedback to a lot of makers over the years. Some asked for, some not. Um, and yeah, it's an interesting one. I'd say almost always it's well received.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I find generally um, people who are attracted to craft chocolate making seem to be usually nice people. Like that's
Yeah,
my experience. It's
pretty
such a
sensible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a nice industry to be part of. It just attracts good people. So yeah, almost always it's received really well. People are grateful for the feedback.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and yeah, I had some good experiences with offering some feedback, and then the chocolate makers maybe sent me some samples again 6 months later, and yeah, a couple of people have said my feedback helped them greatly improve their chocolate, which is an awesome feeling.
Yeah, that's
It's so
wonderful.
nice. Yeah, it's something I'd love to do more. Like I know some people do it professionally. I mean, in terms of like charging for it, but I don't think
Right.
I could charge
I
for it.
know. There
Doesn't
was
feel
a
quite
there was a time I was doing it too, more actively, and I couldn't charge either. It's like because you're a small maker, I know you're not making much money, and you have to ship me the chocolate. You got to pay
right.
for the chocolate, the shipping, and this. It's like, we'll call it even there.
Yeah, totally, totally, yeah.
Um, so I think we kind of covered this too, but how do you feel about flavor suggestions on single origin bars? Are they always helpful? Do you place a lot of importance on them? And when you taste a bar for the first time, do you try and taste it blindly or do you look at the flavor notes first?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and I don't have like a definite opinion on it. Like it's so tricky because those tasting notes on the bar can be confusing to newcomers, right? They see it and
Mm,
then they taste the chocolate and they're like, "Oh, I don't taste these things," and it's like, "Am I doing something wrong?" So in that case,
that's a
it
good
seems
point.
like it's not great. But then at the same time, people who do know about it, some of them do want to know, like I do. I like to know, and I don't always agree with the maker, but usually they're pretty accurate, and it's like same when I order a wine in a restaurant. Like this happened just the other day. We're in this restaurant that had this fancy wine list, no notes on like the flavors. I'm like, tell me, how am I choosing
Mm,
this? It's just names. I want something to
that's
go with.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of do I look at it before I taste it? Usually not. Yeah, sometimes it's unavoidable, but I like to taste it first, see what I think, and then see what they said. That's
Me
just more fun.
too.
For me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to, am I tasting it because of that suggestion or am I really tasting it? I need to know that sometimes for myself.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
But that's a really good point. You know, that's something I think a lot of chocolate makers tackle with and struggle with is, like you said, you put the flavor suggestions there, but then that can discourage customers. You know, maybe that's the first fine single origin chocolate bar they tasted. They're like, I didn't taste this at all. I feel bad. I'm not going to go for it again, you know? And
Yeah.
then if you don't put anything, it's like, well, what's the difference? What am I getting out of here? So that's a really good point. I've seen some makers um, start off, they didn't put anything. Then they put this one maker, they put like 5, 8 different suggestions, I guess, to kind of say like you might get one of these. And then now they're putting these are just suggestions. These are not, you know, you might get it, you might not. So I kind of like that as well.
Yeah. I
I kind of
also,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I quite like rather than like giving specific flavors, giving more of like a vibe and having a little bit of poetic license, like
Mm,
saying like, this is a vibrant bar, or words that like give an indication without saying something specific, I think is quite a nice way to do it.
definitely. And a lot of people in my tastings will sometimes express themselves in that way naturally. You know, like I don't know
Yeah.
what it tastes like, but it makes me feel of this or remember that. That's a really good point. Uh,
Mm.
And how has the craft chocolate world changed since you first started? You mentioned a bit of that at the beginning. What are the positive changes you're seeing? And are you seeing any negative changes happening that you kind of wished weren't occurring?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many positives, there's so much the growth that we've seen in our time that we've been involved with it is awesome to see. And it's just such a great industry to be part of, and I've loved watching it get bigger and bigger. And I think there's still a long way to go, but yeah, it's always new, exciting things all the time. Yeah, and the public's understanding gets more and more all the time, which is great. When I started in New Zealand, nobody knew what anything was. Like it was just like a blank slate, basically,
That's
you know.
tough.
And now, like, there's pretty good understanding, and there's craft chocolate in the supermarkets here, and it's like, whoa, okay, like, yeah, people are learning what this is, and they're also getting used to the price, which is
Mm,
great because it was a real battle in the
mm,
earlier days. Whereas now here, $10 for a chocolate bar isn't crazy anymore. Like,
mm.
there's quite a few brands at that price. Some of them are terrible, and some of them are amazing, but it's like there are a lot. It's become acceptable to be charging that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good point, the price thing, because there are people that are starting to understand and appreciate prices, but then it gets kind of muddled with brands that, you know, they are being to bar, but they're not really in it for the right reasons, perhaps, or they're just not doing a good job. And so a lot of people now, you know, are associating price with quality, and then you're going to stumble on some that it's like, you know, I paid all this money and it's really not worth it. So
yeah.
yeah, it gets a bit complicated sometimes. Um, and any negative trends that you've seen happen?
I guess just mainstream big chocolate starting to
Mm,
replicate what's going on in craft because they're seeing it rise.
okay.
And so that makes it harder to yeah, it's all marketing. It's so hard when you've got these small companies with small marketing budgets competing with the big guys. It's tricky.
Marketing is everything.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I guess like I don't know if it's really a negative, but I think a lot of companies have quickly learned that they need to make some more accessible products. So there's probably quite a lot of companies have started doing much sweeter milk bars, whereas they were all about like the more single origin dark stuff at the beginning. But that can be positive and negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I see what you're saying there. Definitely. There are, I think for a lot of them realizing to survive, you know, a lot of people, it's kind of like not everyone's into espressos and black coffees, right? Right. Kind of like your single origin darks, right? More
Yeah.
people are into lattes and cappuccinos. So it makes sense to have the milks. But I think as long as they do it beautifully, you know, to really bring out the flavor of the bean, you know, respect the flavor of the bean and all that sort of stuff, it can still be done. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
we kind of touched on this too, but I'll ask it again. So what are some achievements or memorable moments you've had with past tastings, events, consumers? What do you find most rewarding when you're within craft chocolate? What are rewarding moments or experiences for you?
Yeah, there were lots of highlights with running the business of different kinds, like on the journalism side, because I started the journalism while I was running the business. And when I started getting articles published in some of the big magazines and stuff, that just was very, very satisfying because I knew it was having a big impact. Um, but then other highlights would just be just seeing all the makers here that have launched over the past like 5, 6 years.
Mm,
It's got, we've gone from sort of five to almost 20 makers in that time. It's been so cool to see all these new people getting involved.
yeah.
Um, and in when was it? 2020, 2021. I organized Chockstock, which was the first ever craft chocolate festival in New Zealand, which I did with Wellington Chocolate Factory. And we had about 9 of the New Zealand makers came, and it was like a 2-day little mini festival, and that felt like a real milestone. Like
Mm,
it was kind of awesome, and it got really good coverage in the media, and it definitely felt like a bit of a flag in the ground kind of moment of like craft chocolate is here,
mm.
Yeah, which was really cool.
Do you think the size physically of the country and the population, that it's kind of more small and tight, do you think that helps accelerate it in your case? Sort of getting that information and people learning about it, experiencing it.
There's
Just
pros and cons. Yeah, it's easier to reach a larger percentage of the population quickly. Um, and also New Zealanders really like supporting New Zealand products. It's a
mm.
real culture here. I think because we're a bit out there, people like to support the small guys and
I noticed that a lot when I was there, more than Canada, I
yeah,
feel.
it's a big thing here, yeah. But then on the negative side, it's still a very small sector of the industry. So for 20 makers to be trying to make a living in a
Mm,
country of 5 million people, that's not currently viable.
right,
So
right.
it's a lot more difficult for people to make it a full-time job. Yeah, so yeah, pros and cons.
Okay. Now, do you have any advice for new makers or makers in general about how they should or shouldn't label their products? So any helpful tips from your experience? So obviously you've seen a lot of bars, you read them, you understand because you've experienced with consumers, their feedback. So, if someone's new, I've talked to some new makers and they're like, what should I put on the wrapper? What's important? What's not? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I guess I kind of touched on it before, a bit of just
Mhm.
like it's so important to tell your story and the story of your chocolate. I would say don't skimp on your designer, like find a
Mm,
great graphic designer and create a really amazing brand, because it's so important, and a lot of people just don't get it right. I've seen I assessed some potential new branding for a maker once. It was a maker who works at Origin, and they sent me these wrapper designs, and aesthetically they were fine, but they just looked like any old kind of normal European craft chocolate
mm,
brand. It was like you're making at Origin, you like work directly with farmers, like you have
mm,
this amazing difference. Why do you want to look like a classy European brand? Like
right.
tell your story, like that's what people buy into people more
What
than
country were they based?
I don't want to say because
Oh,
they're the only
okay.
maker
Oh,
in that
okay.
country.
No problem. I'm just curious because I feel
Yeah,
like some country, like if you're outside of Europe, sometimes it's very cachet to resemble that appearance, right? So I can understand why they
yeah,
went that route. I
yeah,
think
for
it's
sure.
important too. A lot of makers, they don't even put on the wrapper that they're a chocolate maker, that they make it from the cocoa beans. So when I
Yeah,
tell a lot of tasters, the difference between a chocolatier or commercial chocolate and a chocolate maker is like an artisan baker. They're making it from scratch. And then they have bars out there that are incredible, but they don't even say that on the bar. So like, the consumer's not even going to know that. So I think that's
Yeah.
definitely important to put that what they're
Yeah. I think also another thing that people get wrong a lot is like, don't give your chocolate bar some really difficult to pronounce origin name as its bar.
Mm,
Like people don't know what these words are, and people don't like buying stuff when they can't even pronounce the name.
interesting.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I also because I've come from craft beer, like I really would like to see craft chocolate taking a bit of inspiration from craft beer branding, which I think is to such a high standard in New Zealand anyway.
Mm,
And for me, like I'd really like to see more people like giving their bars names that aren't just the origin,
okay.
like so like, here a beer will have a name, like oh it's called White Rabbit or whatever. It's not just
Right.
called IPA. It's not just called 7% porter, Like it's kind of like I think there's too many bars that have these exact same names, It's like
That's a
give your
good
bar,
point
yeah, like
because
bar an
I,
identity.
I think the fine chocolate kind of it's kind of started in Europe more, but then it really took off. The craft thing took off in the United States. And so I think in Europe, it was more catered to the higher end clientele, right? And maybe the geeky type. So they like those things. But now, with all these small chocolate makers all over the world, they're kind of, like I said, the artisan local bakery. They're not catering to that specific niche anymore. So that's a good point. They don't care, the 71 co-op of this. It's like to them, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It needs to resonate a bit more. So that's a really good point. Hmm.
Mm.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Um, no, not
What
off the
about
top.
how do you feel about the ones that sort of have like those craft bags with like very simple, no color, just sort of in a resealable craft sort of looking bag. For me, I don't mind that kind of stuff. Sometimes for me, maybe because of my background, I just see like, oh, they probably don't care about the marketing. They must be doing a really good job with the
Mm.
flavor. So, but you're talking a lot about like beautiful popping branding.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? Do you think those have a place too? Can that succeed, or do you think they should just kind of scrap that and go with something much more colorful?
I I believe any format of packaging can be made to look good with good design.
Mm,
Like I've seen people like she's not making any chocolate anymore, but I don't know if you ever had the smooth chocolater, Yoon Kim.
yes,
Yeah, so she just had like this plain black foil bag with a square sticker on, super basic, super cheap, and it looked so good and it stood out a mile. Like, yeah, so I think you can have the most basic packaging ever, but if you have a good designer, you can make it work. Yeah.
definitely. And I think if you have a good website, that just makes it look more strong. It's sort of that strong silent type. I'm not saying
Yeah.
much, but I jump out. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Now consumers are becoming more informed about, fair trade, organic, but even over the few years, I've encountered people now that are kind of disillusioned by that. They're like, yeah, everyone says fair trade this, organic that, and I don't really trust it anymore. So
Mm.
how important are these components in, our work, your work? And what can consumers do to regain trust in these concepts of fair trade, fairly traded, organic?
Yeah.
It's a
God,
loaded question.
so complex, and they're
Yeah.
both completely different as well, like it's two very
Okay,
complex.
let's stick with the fair trade then.
Yeah, so it's an area I'm really, really interested in and have read a few books about, and it's don't have the answers at all, but there's clearly a lot of problems with the fair trade system, but there's also a lot of positives and a lot of good stories you hear. I think fundamentally the fair trade price is just too low. I think that's the most basic bottom line. Like,
So are you talking about fair trade, the brand, or are we talking about
yeah,
fairly traded in general? So you're talking about fair trade, the
I'm
brand.
talking about specifically like the
Okay.
fair trade seal of approval.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I just think yeah, it's too low. And also, I guess another thing is price isn't everything, it's like just just giving more money isn't the only way to solve these issues.
Mm,
It's a very small part of a hugely complex issue that goes way beyond chocolate, goes into just world trading, goes into local politics. It's huge, you know. But yeah, there's endless work to be done, and I think the difficulty is that anybody feels satisfied with any certification, you know, that's like, okay, sweet, tick that box, we've done enough. Like, because we're only just beginning to
yeah.
like improve things. There's just so much work to be done. So,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And sometimes it can make people and the progress lazy because you feel like something's being done when it's maybe nothing's being done, really,
yeah,
sometimes at the end of the day. So how
yeah.
do for me, because my chocolate bars here, which I'm sure you're familiar with, don't have Fairtrade certified, but they
Mm,
are using fairly traded, direct trade, transparent trade cacao. So
yeah.
how do you explain that to your people, your customers, your consumers? How can they
Yeah.
understand that?
I mean, uh, usually I would say transparency is a really good sign, you know? People who are doing dodgy stuff tend to not tell you everything about it. Like, so if a maker is being super transparent, if they tell you exactly what they've paid at the farm gate or what has been paid at the farm gate for those beans, like it's a pretty good sign that they're at least trying their best to do the
Mm,
right thing. Yeah. So generally, I recommend doing a bit of research, going on a company's website, learning what you can. And yeah, see, and also it's a bit vague, but it's like, what kind of vibe do you get from the people? Like, have you met the people at a festival? You know, like, do they just seem like super nice people? That's a good sign, you know. Like,
that's a
it's
good point too, because what I don't like, especially if there are people in other countries I can't visit, companies I can't visit, when there's no person behind it, it's just a company. For
yeah,
me, I'm like, that's a bit weary. Like, why hide yourself? I think, some people want to do it because it looks professional, that looks makes them look bigger. I get that. But I think in
yeah,
this industry, if you make the owners and the people who run the company invisible, it does set up a couple red flags.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
And that's an interesting point you mentioned about how much they pay for it, because that can be a bit, you know, a lot of companies don't want to, put out there how much they're paying for bars. That can be a bit challenging for them and their competitors and that sort of stuff. So
Mm.
do you feel like makers should be putting that information out there? Um, you know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Do you think it could
chocolate.
cause problems for them if they do that?
I mean, it could do. At the end of the day, the general public who don't know heaps about chocolate, it probably doesn't mean anything to them, the number, you know, but it's more just like, oh, they're telling me exactly what they paid. That's a good sign. Rather than like, oh, well, that's not enough. Or, you know, like it's like the numbers don't mean anything to most people. It's more just the act of saying it is,
Right.
just a bit of it helps gain trust, I would say.
Okay.
And like, chocolate is just a weird industry. Like the history is so messed up that now like we're having to go overboard in the other direction, I would say. You know, like there are very few other industries where you would be expected to give everyone the price of your core ingredient. You know, it's like it's unreasonable, really, that a business should have to do that. But chocolate is just in a different situation.
Yeah, I think when you're thinking of something like wine or cheese, that's a bit different because it's usually grown in the region, right? It's
Mm.
whereas a chocolate, it's very different. It's grown in less developed countries and then sent to more developed countries. So yeah, I can see why that would be much more important to put that sort of information. But I can see why makers might not want to as well. So it just makes
Yeah,
me think, what can be done to make that transparency to consumers like easy, efficient, to grab that information without making too many people uncomfortable or put them in a difficult
yeah.
position.
And there's plenty of other things you can do, you know, like, you know, if you're sourcing your beans from Coco Camilli, you can show the work they're doing. You know, they'll
Right.
send you photos and videos of the community projects that are going on, and all that sort of stuff as well helps so much without having to say like the specific price.
That's a really good point too, is that back and forth, like Tingo Maria or something or whatnot is where they're they say, hey, we're growing this cacao, we're a co-op, and these are the makers that are buying our bars. And, it's, the co-ops and the farmers and whatnot are being sort of showing this connectedness with the maker. It's not just coming from one side, it's coming from both sides. For me, that's much more helpful, much more reassuring.
Yeah,
I
totally,
think
totally.
that's a good point too, is, there's a lot of growers out there. Some of them might be a smallholder farm, some of them might be a larger co-ops, but to give them a platform, maybe give them their own website, their own Instagram account, and so that they can have a voice and put that out there. I think that would be really nice as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, essentially, like chocolate and cacao should be in a mutually beneficial relationship. It's just it's a great business opportunity for everyone involved, is how it should be. I don't like, sorry to use this term, it sounds a bit harsh, but I don't like charity chocolate, like where it's just like, oh, we're saving everyone's lives because we're
Yeah.
selling you chocolate, it's like, no, this
Seems a
should,
little bit demeaning sometimes.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. It's like make growers of cacao are like incredibly hardworking, talented people to produce, high quality cacao. It's that they
And a
should
lot of
be.
them are so passionate about it, like really
Yeah,
excited about it, and they love what they're doing. It's not necessarily, because, my grandparents were farmers and, they wanted to move to Canada to get away from that stuff. And, there's other people, I'm sure, in South America, for instance, like I want my kids to be a doctor or something like that. But then there's some that are just, they love what they do. They want to keep doing it. They want their kids to do it. They're proud of growing this really nice cacao. And so it would be really nice to sustain that, to really give them that purpose in life.
yeah, for
So I would do
sure.
it.
For
Yeah,
sure.
that's a really good point. Um, and so those associated with the craft chocolate movement often speak about transparency at different levels. Do you feel overall there is a lot of transparency with makers and growers? And do you see any room for improvement? So we touched on that a bit, but how do you
Yeah,
feel about that?
yeah. I mean, speaking very generally, I think craft chocolate is one of the most transparent food and beverage industries out there, if not the most, not just in terms of trade arrangements, but in terms of showing like how the product's made. Like, here's our factory, here's exactly what we're doing, which is like common practice for makers to be putting that all over their social media. Like, not many other industries do that, So
Mhm.
I think there's a pretty amazing level of transparency. But yeah, I'm sure there's always room for improvement, and it's some makers are a lot better than others, of course, So, but yeah, I think that's one of the things I love about the industry is just the openness. And yeah, it's as I said before, we've got a lot of wrongs to put right. So it's
Mm.
yeah, it's a good time to be involved.
Yeah. Um, what would you say is, because you don't have a specific role, right? And you're kind of in the middle of things right now, so I'm shifting gears. But what would you say is the goal of the work that you do? What motivates you now? And kind of what are you hoping to see in the future? What is it that you want to see resolved or improved or whatnot?
Yeah, so a few things. Like I touched on before, I want to help define this industry and help people understand what it is and why it's important. Want to keep helping to grow and keep growing the customer base, get more and more people buying and enjoying ethical, high quality chocolate. It's such a tiny, tiny segment of the industry with so much room for growth. I
Mm,
think 10 years ago, a lot of us thought that it was going to explode just like craft beer. And I think it would be fair to say it hasn't got nearly to that point. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which is kind of a whole nother talking point. But essentially, I think a lot of it's to do with the depth of people's attachment to chocolate, which they've been tasting since before they remember, the nostalgia, all of that. It's a lot harder to break people away from what they've grown up eating. So yeah, I just want to keep aiding that, keep seeing it grow. And yeah, like there's all of these amazing growers and bean fermenters and distributors, and we're kind of getting to the point where there's just like there's more good quality cacao than there is good chocolate being bought, So
Mm.
it's like we need to grow that so that we can, just keep um
That's
yeah,
a good
keep
point because
more.
there is a lot of great cacao that ends up not being sold to the people who are going to use it properly, which is unfortunate.
That's that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think there's endless potential, I would say. It really feels like the very, very beginning, even though it's been going however long now, 20 years or something, it still feels like very,
The
very early.
more, yeah, the more I get into it, over the years, because I got into it about 15 years ago.
Yeah,
And the more I got into it, the more I got involved and the more I learned about it. I'm like, this is really new. Like, I thought
yeah,
more people were doing more behind the scenes, and I'm like, there's so much to do. It's so
yeah.
nobody knows what's going on. I'm like, I really
Like the
stumbled on
Wild
something.
West.
Sorry.
It's like the Wild West right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny, like at this point, we've come so far over many years, and it seems like we're just starting in a way.
Yeah, totally. And like stuff like research into cacao genetics and all sorts. It's like, oh, so where's the research on this? Oh, there isn't any, It's
Exactly.
like, whoa, what? When you compare it to like wine or, all those other industries, like, whoa, we know so little at the moment. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a huge part of why on my website I put a lot of research summaries because when I was getting into it, I trusted people above me, this person, that person, that I trust they know what they're talking about. And then I have a background in biology, so my curiosity was like, okay, where's the evidence for this? Where do I find there must be so many papers on it. No, there's nothing. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. So let's get that research out there and start making better conclusions, I think, in general. But one thing I want to touch on is which you touched on earlier about that difference between chocolate and things like coffee, wine. What is it that you wanted to say? You said there's sort of a difference there as far as how consumers view it. So, what are those differences? Why is chocolate in its own category compared to maybe coffee, wine, beer, whiskey?
I think a lot of it is the fact that most people come to those foods and beverages a lot later in life than they do chocolate.
Mm,
Like most people don't start drinking coffee till they're, say, a teenager, you
right.
know.
There's no
They're just,
babies sipping whiskey.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the depth of connection isn't nearly as strong. So converting people to the higher quality, more expensive version is a lot easier with those things than it is with chocolate, I think. And yeah, I just find chocolate isn't taken as seriously
Yeah,
as those
I say
things,
that a
and
lot.
and it drives me crazy.
And why is that?
I guess again, it's the childness thing, the child connection thing. It's seen as something fun and basic, and like we don't want this to be complex. We don't want it to be like fine wine, and in some ways, I don't want it to be like fine wine world. In some ways, I do, and in some ways, I don't. I don't want it to become like snobby and exclusive. But like,
Yeah,
I want people to think of it as a serious food, and it's like just tasting. It's the whole quality over
I
quantity
think
of.
wine sommeliers are going to hate me for saying this, but I think, and I get people would back me up that chocolate is so much more complex,
Oh,
flavor wise,
yeah,
and there's so much more to experience. And you mentioned because we enjoy it in childhood, but I also think it's because, which you probably agree, is the marketing is geared. Chocolate's always kids,
yeah,
Easter candies, things like that,
totally,
and it's been like that for decades and decades and decades. And
totally, yeah.
it's
It's like,
associated with child's play, basically,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's like whenever I see an article in the media about chocolate here in New Zealand that I didn't write, I'm like, okay, how long till we get the Willy Wonka reference?
I
Like
know,
every time, it drives me nuts. It's
I
like,
know.
move on.
I had to dress up like Willy Wonka once. You probably know where. I was like, okay, I'll be nice. I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, for sure, for
do it for the
sure.
people.
Yeah, yeah, but
But
no,
no,
it's
that's a really
it's
important point. Make taking
what's
it
interesting
seriously.
is like nostalgia obviously takes a long time to build and to be created. So what I'm interested to see is like, where's craft chocolate going to sit in 20 years? Is there going to be nostalgia for what's happening now in craft chocolate?
Mm.
You know, we can't know, but it's like it's such a long game, I would
Yeah.
say, tapping into that nostalgia market, and it's such a big part of chocolate. Yeah.
So what do you think chocolate makers could do, for instance, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, to sort of make chocolate seem a bit more serious without being too pretentious? Because there is sort of is sometimes is getting into that pretentiousness as well.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, it comes down to branding and design a lot, I would
Mm,
say, but also just how you talk about your product. I mean, I look at the craft beer world a lot, and I see them as being in between. They're kind of like it's being taken a lot more seriously now, but it's still not taken as seriously as wine, but it's taken a lot more seriously than chocolate, you know? And so I feel like they're sort of 30 years ahead, say, in terms of their path. And they have the mixture of obviously it's not the same because it's not got the child, you know, nostalgia thing, but it's like it's got a much more fun element than wine, I would
mm,
say. But at the same time, there are serious judging competitions going on. There's, you know, full-time beer writers and beer sommeliers now. And so it's like, yeah, it's interesting to see that progression. And
mm.
I mean, I think craft chocolate's mostly doing all the right things to take it in that direction, but it's just going to take a really long time.
Do you
Yeah.
think that it's important to do a lot of pairings in order to sort of help carry chocolate?
Yeah, totally. And that's what I did with the chocolate bar. Like the first 5 years of the chocolate bar, I was doing tastings at least once a month, and I just collaborated with every type of business under the sun, you know, winemakers, breweries, cheesemakers, and just, yeah, it's such a good way to get people to understand. Yeah.
So you did
Uh,
that because you wanted to kind of show the parallels, or why else?
yeah, show the parallels, show that they pair well together, mostly just get people to realize that chocolate is a complex and serious food at the same time as being fun, you
Hmm.
know? Yeah, it's a good way for people to get people to understand. Yeah.
Okay,
Mm.
wonderful. Um, and any future plans regarding in regards to chocolate that you wish to reveal? Do you have any ideas for the future, general or specific?
Yeah, I can't say too much at the moment. I've got a restraint of trade in New Zealand for another year after selling my business. But yeah, I've got all sorts of ideas of how to keep growing things here. I'd definitely keen to get into more events again in another year or so, and yeah, keep working on. I've got back into the beer world a bit after selling my business through journalism and a few other things, and I'm very interested in the crossover there. I think they're really fun worlds that can benefit from each other, and yeah, I'd like to do more stuff with that in the future, and hopefully more journalism. I'm constantly just trying to write new articles and trying to
Is
do
that
a
your
bit more.
background in writing? Is that
No, it
okay?
just yeah, yeah. I pretty much just worked hospitality most of my life and have pursued various passions throughout that. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'd done a bit of writing, just creative writing. And yeah, when I started the business, I can't remember what I think my first article was for like Vegan New Zealand magazine or something, where it's like relatively easy to get in. And then like off the back of that, I went to like one of the bigger food magazines, and yeah, it just kind of went from there. And I got a real taste for the journalism. I just love the impact it has. You know,
Mm.
you just can't beat the reach of these mainstream magazines. And I I just have to kind of trick them into letting me write about serious craft chocolate. You know, you always have to find like the catchy angle, but
I
then like once
know.
you get into the article, it's like, oh, okay, I'm actually like spreading the important word.
That's a good way to put it. Sometimes people come to me like, I want to talk to you about chocolate. Let's talk about Easter eggs and this and that. Like,
Yeah,
so many more important things. But
yeah,
no, that's really nice. That's something that's not my forte at all, is writing. You know, I write a lot of content, but I'm more of a content kind of person, but you probably
yeah.
put it together much more lovely than I can. Um, And is there anything else that you said or want to talk about that you want to mention that maybe we didn't cover?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. What's good? Can I ask you what you're up to these days? I see a little bit of stuff online.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not very big on the social media. You have to go to my website to really see what's
Yeah.
happening. But I'm really pushing my whole start um, in the past few years, and when I started the app and the Bean to Bar world and all that sort of stuff, was really educating the public. So probably like you, I feel like, the general public really has no knowledge. And I just want to constantly raise the bar of the common person, people that are not into fine chocolate, maybe not into fine foods. And so my focus really is just having a lot of events, a lot of virtual tastings, but just reaching these beginners in a way that's approachable, like you said, getting them to understand the difference between commercial and bulk, really experience flavor. My angle is very sort of, I don't want to say science-based because that sounds kind of annoying too, but I do use a lot of the science of flavor and sort of
Yeah.
focusing not just on understanding the chocolate makers and that, but also how does flavor work? How do we perceive flavor? What is happening? What can we do to better these things? And the reason why I'm so passionate about that is, when I started off, I was learning things that were not such great information. And so now that I have this really good information, this good research, I want to kind of get it out there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my goal. That's why I'm doing these videos too. I'm starting to reach as many people as I want because I want to, you know, people to learn from like watch this video and learn about chocolate. I'm sure you're going to say, you've said many things that a lot of people never thought about. And that's what I want people to do, start thinking about chocolate differently. Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great.
I talk too much too. You have to interrupt me sometimes.
Uh,
Um,
I do as well. Don't worry about it.
and for people who want to, contact you for your services, for writing, for whatever, what's the best way nowadays to reach you?
So either Instagram or my website, probably. So Instagram is at Luke Owen Smith, and the
Okay.
website is lukeowensmith.com.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both pretty
Excellent.
easy. Yeah, and yeah, I'm available for whatever.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, it's really, really nice to see you again. It's nice to know that you're still passionate about it. Um, I was worried for a moment when I heard you sold your business, and I was like, is he done with chocolate? I was like, he's so good at it and he's so passionate. But I'm glad that you're not. So
I
I
think I'm in
wish
this for
good,
life.
good. Yeah, me too, no matter what happens.
Yeah,
Um, so I wish you well with your writing, with all your ideas and the new projects that you have coming up. And I hope you continue to succeed, and I hope you continue to uplift the fine chocolate world in New Zealand, and just really, I think you've contributed a lot. I know I've even met people in like Canada who was like, "Oh, I love Luke. Luke is great." I'm like, "Wow, you know about him.
oh,
That's
it's
awesome."
nice to
So
hear.
yeah, you're making a big impact. So keep it up.
Oh, thank you, Joseph. You are too. So yeah, thanks very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for watching this interview, and hope to see you again. Take care.